You're listening to the Public Rail Now podcast. As always, I'm your host, Adam. I'm really excited to have Brandon on this episode. He's a former railroad worker who has experienced a lot, seen a lot, and it's an honor to have him on the program to share his experiences and thoughts. We talk about the railroad industry, the UP-NS merger, the Barnum and Bailey circus, and so much more. It was a pleasure speaking with Brandon, and I hope you enjoy our conversation as much as I did. You really can't get the straight dope on the rail industry anywhere else than from the folks that work on the railroad, so I'm thankful, and Public Rail Now is thankful that he gave us some of his time. If you like the work we do and want to get involved, or if you want to learn more about Public Rail Now, check out our website, publicrailnow.org. And I know times are tough, but if you got a couple bucks to spare, you can always donate to Public Rail Now on our website as well. We're a small team and need all the help we can get, and we appreciate every single dime that lets us continue our important work. Thanks for listening.
Yeah, I'm Brandon. I worked on the railroad in North Platte, Nebraska for 15 years in the world's largest rail yard. And that's me. I left in 2019, right before the whole world went crazy. And I'm still interested in the railroad because I have family that work there. My brother still works there. My dad retired from there. And it's just one of those things that I still care about.
Yeah, that's great. And thanks again for taking the time to be on. And I'm really excited to talk to you about everything that's going on related to the railroads. But, I want to get your thoughts, especially on the pending Union Pacific Norfolk Southern merger. But before we get into that, I think our listeners would love to hear more about your background and your general impressions of the railroad industry. And, we've talked before about your experiences on the railroad. And I think revisiting some of what we've discussed in the past will help people better understand, what we mean when we say that this merger is just going to make things worse. So, to kick us off here, how did you come to work on the railroad, and what was the job like when you were first introduced to the industry?
Yeah, so in 2005, I saw an ad on the internet for a job in North Platte, Nebraska. I was an electrician at the time, and I saw that ad. I applied, and it was for train service. And so the railroad gave me like 10 minutes to decide if I wanted to move from Kansas to North Platte, Nebraska. And I decided to go ahead and jump on that because at the time, the railroad was really a great job. It was a dream job. It was the kind of job that you look forward to, spending your career there. And a lot of people did. So I thought, especially being in the world's largest rail yard, there would be plenty of work, look forward to a nice, long, safe career. But unfortunately, as things changed, we really noticed a change in leadership and management in the 2015, 2016 era. There was a lot of emphasis on operating ratio, and they called it a whole bunch of different things. And then they eventually settled on one called PSR, or Precision Scheduled Railroading. And the decisions that came out of that were largely negative for me and my family. And so going forward, I had to leave the railroad, which pretty much brings us to where we are now, looking back on, a career that was fun. I enjoyed it. I mean, it was great most of the time, but those last 2 or 3 years under PSR were really difficult. And their general policies of wanting to cut labor to nothing and just run on a skeleton crew. It's hard to manage like that. It's hard to exist when they push everything to exhaustion and collapse. So that, to me, with that mindset going into this merger, that's a terrifying proposition that, two entities with that same attitude can come together and create a bigger, more powerful, less accountable railroad is terrifying.
Yeah, absolutely. And in a conversation we had a while back, you talked about those job cuts, and you talked about how there was a time when workers in the yard had the option of like early quits. If you finished the work, you could go home. But as those changes you were talking about like came into play, all those jobs that were cut, the workloads of the remaining workers became unreasonable. I mean, guys were exhausted, and so could you talk a little bit about that, like what it was like before and what happened after? Yeah.
So with three shifts in North Platte, they used to print out the daily preference board, which was all the jobs for each day, and I watched that list go from something that was above my head, and I'm 6'1", and it would fall down on the floor. It was that long with the old printer paper that was seamed together with little perforated edges, but it shrunk from that to something that was just completely ridiculous to try and run a yard off of. And having just gone through the holidays, we would have some days on a holiday. If you worked a holiday, you might only work 4 hours. If the work got done, you got to go home. Typically, you could 6 hours was not uncommon. And some guys would routinely get the 4-hour quit. It just depended on what work there was available. But and I understand, the need to make money and be profitable. But as they started cutting that, and the jobs got fewer and fewer, we really noticed it when the holidays would come around, or bad weather would come around, or a local community event would take place, graduations, things like that are important to people. You just watch those things, people not be able to go to those things anymore, and the longer hours and all that makes it harder on your family and on people in general.
Yeah, and you talked about the health problems and the dangers that workers were experiencing, especially when they're exhausted. And you talked about cancer and heart disease, injuries, even deaths that you've seen. I mean, terrible things you've in experienced firsthand as far as injuries. Like, so can you tell our listeners a little more about what you've experienced and what those other workers went through that you saw, those health hazards and dangers that railroad workers face?
Yeah, working in harsh conditions and the worst kinds of weather, um, minus 20 degrees was some of the coldest weather that I worked in. Sometimes the rules would require you to be out on the nose of a locomotive as you're going down the road and switching in the yard, 10, 15 miles an hour in blizzard conditions. It's rough. Asking for a break, not being able to have one, other people getting injured, amputations. We went a long time without an injury in North Platte, and then when they started cutting the jobs, we saw people getting hurt. Fuel truck drivers crushed, people that lost limbs, feet, fingers, people getting clipped in the bowl, partially coupled. Things like that became more and more common. And when you're working in those conditions without the manpower, it's only to be expected.
Yeah, and in terms of like the thinking about this merger, it and we talk about precision scheduled railroading or pretty shitty railroading is what I've heard people talk about it as, and I think that's a pretty accurate description of it. I mean, it's clear that they want to keep cutting these jobs, and even though they say that they want to protect them, and like I mean, Union Pacific just came out with something recently where we're going to protect all these jobs, but I mean
Yeah,
that's just given their history, or how can we believe that?
yeah, I don't see that happening. It it's a zero sum game with these guys. You know, what was the President Cargill said? PSR is doing less with less, and that's what they're about. So, just look at the track record. I think it was just this week it came out in ABC News, put out a story about some research that was done. Most of the story was that most of the recommendations that are given to the FRA from really educated, smart, scientific people, as well as just everyday boots on the ground types, most of those recommendations get ignored. And so if that's their track record, and it has been for the last, especially since 2015, 2016, there's really no assurance that they'll guarantee those jobs. They'll find some way to cut them, to thwart the efforts, whatever you want to call it. So the title of that article was from ABC News was "Railroads and Their Regulators Thwart Safety Fixes Costing Lives." And I mean, that's, according to that article, 23 people died and 1,200 injuries in the last decade. So that pretty well takes in the PSR era. And I just don't see any motivation for them to not keep doing what they're doing. It's just too profitable. So even if that means loss of life, they're willing to do that. So they certainly don't care about the loss of a job.
Right. And I mean, they also, in thinking about, oh, we're going to protect these jobs, all these claims that they're making, something we've talked about before as well is, well, they still can move you, 200 miles away. They can still uproot you
Yeah.
and your family, like, to keep that
Yeah.
job.
I don't know how they would guarantee that if they decide, I've seen in my career people that had so-called guaranteed jobs, and then one day those people were told, well, your job doesn't exist anymore, so you're on your own, and they just eliminated the job. And what those people did, I don't know. I never saw them again. But they had, supposedly guaranteed jobs. If in our craft, it's seniority based. So if my seniority is in North Platte, Nebraska, and they decide that they want to close the classification yard, then so be it. But what does that mean for me if my seniority will no longer hold that area because there's that many fewer jobs? I have to go somewhere else. And maybe they would let me do that, but then there's issues with the guys where you're moving to and your seniority and complications with that. And not to mention the fact that it may be something that me and my family don't even want to do. It's not what I signed up for. It's not what I agreed to. It's not how I planned my career.
Yeah, and I haven't seen. I mean, one of the things that I hear that I don't hear it enough, like in mainstream outlets or anything, but from railroad workers is we still haven't even seen anything in writing. So it's like and
Yeah.
all these stuff that we're hearing from Union Pacific is
Right.
just we're just supposed to take them at their word verbally, like
Yeah.
so
yeah. I mean, for my dad, when he went through the merger with SP and UP, Southern Pacific and Union Pacific, when UP bought them, he lost a week's vacation. So, there's no guarantees. I don't see it benefiting the worker. This is purely a move that consolidates power, and my guess is makes it easier to avoid accountability.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, I also have I've heard folks talking about how, there might even just through attrition, they might find some loophole to eliminate these jobs. Like they'll make the job so miserable that
Mm-hmm.
guys will quit and then
Yeah.
they'll just eliminate that job. It's like, well, we didn't fire anybody. We just, we just did away with the position basically.
Yeah. So yeah, if you work a guy to the point that he can no longer do his job safely, you can expect him to choose to want to live and be healthy. And yeah, that doesn't guarantee his job, and they could probably claim that it was guaranteed on paper, but realistically, he made a decision that what he would just have to choose safety and a form of life that's sustainable for him. So yeah, I don't see a guarantee really something that they can be held to.
In past conversations, we've talked about retaliation and surveillance and all these parts of the job that make it increasingly miserable for the people that do the work. And
Yeah.
I mean, you're a whistleblower, you're a two-time whistleblower. In fact, if I recall our
Right.
conversation from a while back correctly, can you
Correct.
tell our listeners about what happened in those cases, why you blew the whistle on the company, and what came of
Yeah.
it, and how big was the target on your back after those whistleblowing?
Yeah. Well, you can just look at current situations with individuals on social media and things that as they talk about, if there's a safety issue, they're going to always blame the worker. So if I go to work and I say, hey, this locomotive isn't safe, then they turn around and they look at me and they say, oh, well, you're trying to slow down production, and you're trying to cause trouble. And uh, that's when constant surveillance, constant observation. Back then they started coming out with drones, which I understand is a more and more popular way of observing employees. They were proud of the fact that they were putting eyes in the sky to try and catch people, not for the purpose of correcting their behavior, but just for laying blame. So something totally unrelated to the unsafe locomotive that that might bring up in the beginning of my shift, they're going to come back with some footage of me, breaking a rule, and taking it out of context and using it as a way to retaliate against a person, to make them unsure of their job, and basically to keep them quiet so that they're not going to complain about safety.
I've heard stories like about how, you point out something's wrong, or, there's some kind of safety concern that you have, and then there's a target on your back, and then they'll just start writing you up for things that are just totally like, just like, oh,
Right.
you have a button on, or like you're
Yeah.
not wearing the right shirt or something, like just really stupid stuff that they'll
Right.
like write you
So
up for all of a sudden.
yeah. So the point is intimidation, and being able to hold something over your head, to make you more compliant with what they expect. So I can just look at situations that happened, where they force compliance with people because they're afraid of losing their job. And one story I observed was a locomotive that was on fire. So it wouldn't take a overly cautious person to say that, wow, maybe that's a piece of equipment that we shouldn't be using. But when I came to work one day, I saw a switchman evacuating the locomotive that was on fire, and then they expected me to use that locomotive. So when you have the conversation with the manager on the radio and he says, "Are you refusing to work?" That's a trap to get you to refuse, which you can be fired for. That's a rule violation for refusing to follow the orders of the manager. So if you do that, then yeah, you can expect some charges to be filed and get some certified paperwork. On the other hand, you can refuse to use that locomotive and get to go home that day. So it makes for a tough situation as an employee trying to navigate that throughout a career where you're worried about safety, but you're also worried about keeping your job.
Thinking about how many hazards already are out there and all the things that they're trying to already do, even, before we don't know if the merger is going to go through, but even without the merger, there's all these efforts to go back to the single person crew thing. We thought that was like, oh well, they gave up that battle, but they haven't. And they're even trying to do things like automate inspections and whatnot. And I mean, it just, it's just kind of mind
Yeah.
blowing.
Yeah. Well, my position on automation and technology is if it saves lives, yeah, let's do it. I'm all in. I don't want to see my friends lose their limbs, which some of them have, or their lives, which some of them have. And if technology can help that, then let's do it. But the problem is with the railroad, the way they implement that stuff, it's never really working out to where it's actually a safer railroad. And so they get what they want with the elimination of jobs and people, manpower, but then the end result is a less safe, less working railroad, and the public is at risk when they do that too.
100%. I mean, derailments happen way more than people think they do. I mean, the East Palestine derailment was obviously devastating, but people don't realize that there are potential East Palestines going on constantly. Like, so it's not like railroad workers are absolutely at risk, but the practices of the class one railroads make it so any neighborhood that these trains are running through, I mean, you're going to have miles long trains, heavier and heavier trains with PSR, and you're also going to have shorter and shorter inspections, or have an unaccountable robot do it. So while you're cutting costs and cutting the workforce, I mean, it's just a recipe for disaster.
Right. I mean, just going by that ABC News article that came out, 3,000 rail accidents over the last decade. That's a grossly underreported number, because not every car that goes off the rail is counted. But when you think about what can happen when a car does go off the rail, you see the potential that could result. I mean, I was a part of so many derailments um, that were never reported, and nothing. Not saying the railroad was trying to cover them up, although they did cover a few up. Uh, Sometimes it just doesn't fall within the reporting threshold, but it's the potential for harm uh, that they're missing, and that's where you can get in East Palestine or worse.
Yeah, and speaking of derailments, I remember you telling me about one particular derailment involving the Barnum and Bailey Circus. I don't know if you want to
Yeah,
tell our listeners
yeah,
about that.
sure. Yeah, I mean, yeah, that was that was an interesting night. We were working a job that was shoving cars across the main line, and we were coming up to where we were going to cross the main line, but we were just to the side of it. And I'm riding a cut of cars on the end of the car with a remote control, and I have a helper with me who's in the cab of the locomotive, and so we're going backwards. The cars are going first, and the locomotive is coming along behind. And as we're going along beside the main, we go through a curve, and I hear my helper say, "Hey, you need to slow down real easy." And I start slowing down, and I'm just bracing for, I don't know, a break into where the cars keep rolling, even though I'm supposed to be stopped. But eventually we did come to a stop, but it was pretty clear that something had gone wrong. So I took off running toward the locomotive. And right at the same time as this is happening on the main line, I hear the circus train departing from the East Rack. And as they're going by me, I'm running back to see how bad the damage is. I don't know if we're one wheel on the ground or cars sideways going north and south blocking the main, and the circus train is going to be running into those cars and derailing and taking out circus animals and elephants and clowns and everybody else. And so as I'm running back, I see the cars of the circus performers going by. I see the animal cars, and I see them moving, so I know that they haven't hit anything, and we're okay. But it was a terrifying moment for a while, thinking that we just took out the Barnum and Bailey circus train.
I mean, it's like imagining that, like you think you're gonna see elephants and kangaroos and stuff like
Yeah,
flying all over. Like,
that was my fear. Yeah, I was genuinely worried that we were going to see circus animals all over the tracks from where they'd ran into our derailed train. That particular derailment was caused by wide gauge in the rail, so um, it was an easy cleanup. Uh, Probably wasn't even reportable. I don't even think they drug tested me that night. So
wow.
to have been that close to a disaster and then just walk away and go back to work, um, that kind of thing would happen from time to time.
Something that you brought up in our most recent survey about the merger was you expressed concern about congestion and disrupting the global supply chain, and that's not something that I've seen too often mentioned. And I wanted to see if you could elaborate on that, because I think
Yeah,
that's definitely a major concern that people don't talk
right.
about enough.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. So when I was on the railroad, I was also a trainer, a remote control teacher, both in the classroom and out in the field. And we train new hires, right? So you would see these patterns developed of when the railroad didn't have enough people, and then they would see the need, usually too late, to start hiring. And you would watch this incredible cluster unfold where they just couldn't handle the traffic because they didn't have the manpower. And then they would overhire, right? And then they would lay them off, and they would lay too many off. And so what it did was it caused these huge traffic jams where traffic would pile up in one location or another and couldn't move through the region because it didn't have the resources necessary to do that. So when I think about a merger happening, I don't see how that's going to be possible, given the fact that they can't manage the trains, they can't manage the people before a merger. How are they going to do that when they combine two coast to coast transcontinental entities into one? It's not going to happen. There's no way that they're going to do it. And what you're going to see is things like during the pandemic, where we had a huge manpower shortage. I think the PSR statistics were, they'd cut something like a third of the workforce over the course of a few years. And so you had all these container ships out in the Pacific Ocean and the Port of Los Angeles and other places just piling up because there was a traffic jam inland. If the yard in North Platte is full, that's going to eventually start backing up all the way to the West Coast or even out east. So the logistics of a merger with these guys in charge, that's a terrible idea because they can't manage it when it's in normal operating conditions.
Yeah, and I mean, that's what was kind of comical about looking at the Union Pacific Norfolk Southern website that they've made. The Great Connection, creating America's first transcontinental railroad, is they say, oh, this is going to expand service offerings for underserved areas, and we're going to reach underserved areas faster, and blah blah blah. But
Yeah.
if anything, the opposite is true. I mean, they already are trying to cut as much service as they can. So
Yeah,
it's like,
right.
of course these disruptions are going to get worse.
Yeah. I mean, if you look back at the pandemic and the stories that came forward to the Surface Transportation Board there, all these owners of corporations and utilities and things were coming forward with horror stories. Coors was looking at running out of beer during the 4th of July. There were poultry. What's the big poultry place out on the west? Foster Farms. They couldn't feed their chickens. They were going to have to euthanize chickens. Coal plants, electricity plants were days away from running out of coal. And to see that just during the pandemic, to think of what could happen during a merger is really scary. If I were anyone who needs electricity, or if I were the owner of electricity company, a power plant or something, I would have a plan B for how you're going to keep power on for people, because in a merger situation, the congestion it's hard to predict how bad the congestion could get from that merger.
In Cleveland, where I'm at, I mean, we have power outages constantly. Like First Energy
Really?
is always like having problems. We just had a blowout the other day, and half the town's completely dark. In thinking about the connection of the railroads to energy production and providing electricity and all these different things, that's another major connection that I don't think folks are making when they're considering what this merger is going to do. I mean, if there's already problems with the grids, like imagine what this is going to look like.
Yeah. So a global supply chain that depends on transformers that are produced in other countries, probably doesn't have them on a shelf at Home Depot where you can just go pick one. So in the event of a serious failure of the grid where you need something quickly, I can't imagine what the lead time on that would be. I would think it would be months, if not years, before a large transformer could be moved and located on the railroads for sure. And then in a lot of cases, that's the only way to move it. So if they don't have a plan in mind, this could get sideways in a terrible way that we can't even imagine. And I don't see them having a plan.
Yes, yeah, I don't think they do. I mean, and if they do have a plan, we haven't seen it in writing. It's like
Yeah.
anything else they
So so the plan probably falls along the lines of what they did with the East Palestine folks, right?
do. Mm.
If you get a letter in the mail saying, you have to move out of your house, then so be it. They'll take the steps of whatever's profitable and beneficial for them without informing the public, and the public will be left to deal with the consequences as best they can.
Yeah, and I mean they've already been trying to silence as many critics as they can of this thing. I mean, Primus getting dismissed and all that. Like, I mean, that's a
Mm,
huge controversial move because I mean, he was the only one that came out against I think the 2023 merger. I mean,
mm,
it's and so if they see anybody even in government positions, anybody that's critical of it, they're gonna just dismiss them and then just like you said, keep it from the public as much as possible. So when something happens, like in East Palestine or some other kind of disaster occurs, people are in the dark about it.
yeah, it's they don't want to hear it. I get it. It takes from their profits. It's what they want to do. Um, but the outcry from several East Palestines or worse would be something that I don't think they're even prepared for.
No, I mean, imagine if a Lac-Megantic happens here.
Yeah, you blow up a town, sure. Yeah, you're gonna have some really upset people in the public sphere, and not everybody who's important works for the railroad, right? So at some point, their greed is going to cross over into the lives of other greedy people, and then you're going to get a war of greedy people where victims include wealthy and important people from other communities, and to just sit back and be victimized by one conglomerate is, how is that good?
Right. I mean, yeah. And speaking of that, I mean, we've seen these industry groups come out against the merger that represent shippers. So, I mean, there already is
Mm-hmm.
a chunk of the business class that's
Right,
saying, no, like this is bad and
right.
we don't like
So
anything about it.
yeah, so what happens when Elon Musk's AI farm in Memphis, Tennessee, or Nashville, or wherever it is, runs out of power because the railroads are in such dysfunction that they can't, keep his AI farm online, right? You're probably going to hear a few angry tweets from a guy like that. Um, there was a time in North Platte when a carload of Teslas went over the hill and burst into flames. So the PR, the negative PR that can come from that, from a company like Tesla or any big corporation, Cargill or anything like that, they're going to hit hard. And I don't think the railroad's at all prepared for that.
I wouldn't be surprised. Maybe they already have, but any representatives of the trucking industry, I mean, when they see it's a claim. Who knows if it would actually occur? But how Union Pacific saying, "Oh, we're going to take X amount of trucks off the roads, and we're going to move freight back onto the rails and all this stuff." Well,
Mm-hmm.
these competing transportation like industries are not going to like that. So there's another
Yeah.
big side of it.
Well, they've cut a fat hog for the last 30 years as the railroads have become so incompetent that they can't move a normal amount of freight for a country as large and industrialized as ours. So the fact that we do it on trucks at all, to me, is a mark of shame and how a modern country should be working. But they don't mind saying no to customers that aren't as profitable. So that's why you see more trucks on the road. And the trucking industry has been able to benefit from that because they're a more efficient, organized group of leaders, I guess.
Speaking of that, how the Class One railroads just there's there's a whole section of the shippers, especially the smaller shippers, who already get screwed all the time. I mean, they, like you said, they have been forced to move their freight onto trucks. And I mean, what is this merger going to mean for even more shippers? I mean, if these two massive corporations come together, it seems like it's going to expand the amount of shippers that they can kind of give the finger to.
Yeah, I don't see that. Less competition gives them more power, right? So they can say no to whatever customers may be wanting service, and they can just charge more to the customers that are already locked in. So because there's no option, and they can play each other off, play each customer off of each other. If they want to cancel one contract and go with another customer that they raise prices on, they can do that.
Yeah, yeah. And so thinking about all these problems that we're looking at with this merger, I wanted to get your take on how the rail workforce and especially the rail unions have been responding. So we've seen, some unions have signed on to it, like Smart
Mm-hmm.
TD is like the biggest one. Others, especially BLET,
Mm.
come out in opposition. So, what's your take on how they're handling the situation, and how do you think railroad workers and their unions should be responding to this?
I'll be honest, I'm a little out of touch with what the unions have done. I see the occasional post on social media for, or in some cases, or against in others. And I really don't know what their angle is, if it's a race to the bottom and every man's just trying to grab the last lifeboat. I don't know, but I would think as a whole, anyone who still has a job on the railroad is about to have a major disruption in their life, and I hope the unions can pull something out of the ashes. I don't see it happening before the merger, but maybe when this whole thing blows up, the unions are the ones that'll be around to pick up the pieces. That's my best guess.
Yeah, to your point about, being sort of like a last man standing thing. I think I've heard that sentiment expressed by other folks that have worked on the railroad, and it's kind of like a race to the bottom is a good way to describe it. I mean, it's really like you don't want to be the last man standing, like you
Right.
like
The
because they'll
last
just
man with a
start
job.
targeting you. Yeah, like they'll if you're the last holdout, it's you're kind of screwed because they don't work together. It's kind of like this
Yeah.
competitive unionism craft thing.
Yeah. I mean, we saw that with the remote control technologies. It seemed like the unions were quick to sign a deal that wasn't that great, that got rid of a lot of jobs. And I don't know, maybe they need better negotiators. The railroads seem to have the good ones.
Definitely. Well, hey, Brandon, I want to thank you again so much for your time and sharing your experiences and your perspective with me and our listeners. Is there anything that we haven't talked about that you'd like to share before we close out?
No, man, I appreciate the conversation. Like I said, I still miss my railroad friends. I miss the railroad job, but when it was time to move on, I had to.